Marcus Freeman's Fighting Irish embarked on their second week of spring practice, and today Tim Prister and John Brice, we were able to speak with defensive line coach Al Washington, offensive line coach Joe Rudolph, but we also saw snippets of practice, about 4 periods, and some super dynamic stretching as well. John, you and Andrew Bentock kind of watched the offense during that period. Is there some lasting impressions you have for this point?
Yeah, I mean, a few, and we wrote about this morning, but I really thought that the running backs looked good, like a burst with Jadarian Price. But honestly, Kedron Young, I mean, to be 235, the way he went through the agility drills, and Juwan Sider had them going through a cut agility drill where they have to keep their eyes up. They're working over the cushioned stanchions or whatever you want to call them, and it was just a really active set. Jabron Payne, you would never know that the guy is, 11 months or less than 11 months removed from ACL surgery. Maybe the quickest feet of the group. Not the most talented, but the quickest feet of the group. I thought that the receivers looked overall really good today. I noticed Jeremiah Love in a pass scale session dropped a pass that he never should have dropped from Steve Angeli, and those are two of your more veteran guys on offense, especially Jeremiah Love. The rest of the offense jogged down to repeat the drill coming the other way. Jeremiah Love wouldn't jog down until he caught the ball and turned it upfield. And so, it's an attention to detail in a moment like that. Offensive line just quickly went outside and watched them on the outdoor fields as they got some work in, and just from left to right, it's Styles Prescott, it's Sullivan Absher, Joe Otting, Charles Jagasa, and Gerby Lambert. But we asked Joe Rudolph emphasizing Gerby Lambert is training at left and right tackle.
Tim Priester, you had the fun job today where you get to write about your observations tomorrow. You get to see the entire field. Is there something today that, I don't know, maybe leading into the interview session that you wanted to discuss?
Well, I mean, Jeremiah Love catching passes. Of course, he's not moving to wide receiver, but I think that's still a good idea. That was something that they implemented last spring, and I still think and they did it in the fall as well. We thought we'd see him spread out a little bit more, but not so. But I think that's good. It just makes his game that much more well-rounded, as if he needs another skill added to his skill set. But I mean, I have to concur with what John said about the running backs. I mean, Jabron Payne he has no kind of sleeve or brace on his knee. He looks very quick. He's actually probably a little light. He's at 198, a little bit under 200. I think Jadarian Price looks fantastic. He's only listed at 202. I remember, Dylan McCullough was always telling the running backs to add another layer of armor to them, and he could probably use it, but he looks super, super quick. The wideouts, I guess I mainly saw the offense from up above today, and Will Pauling came out a little bit late, but man, that dude is, when you talk about putting a foot in the ground and coming back to the football, he stands out in that group. Jaden Greathouse, of course, is up top there as well with Jordan Faison, but there's a burst. Will Pauling said the other day, he talked about he was quick twitch and has some breakaway ability. I didn't necessarily see that in his game film. Not a guy that's going to break a lot of tackles. He's an underneath receiver. He's going to average 9 yards a catch. But man, he may prove me wrong there, because he showed some quick twitch, I think, the last 2 times that we've been out here at practice.
Spring practice is about cross-training at this point, especially when you have different layers of players at different levels of participation. I had the defense today. Thought it was interesting they brought out a back 7 against a skeleton. So in other words, this was the nickel. You had Devontae Smith first, Leonard Moore and Christian Gray obviously on the corners. Luke Talich, of course, was joining Adon Schuler at safety. And this is a Will and Mike pairing. I'm going to go all the way down, and it'll be different next week, so do not read anything out of this. But it was a Will and Mike pairing of Jalen Sneed and Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury and KVA, Teddy Rizak, and middle linebacker Madden Faremo, and then Preston Zinter and Bodie Cahoon. Now that's going to change because KVA is probably on his day where this was his pullback time, and that was most likely Drake Bowen next time we see that. But I thought it was interesting to see those pairings because that means they are working Jalen Sneed some at will. I bring that up because they are going to be, as long as they keep going after a high-priced free agent and nickel guy from Alabama, they're going to be a 4-2-5 team because, as Max Bulla said, Mr. Linebacker It is a 4-2-5 world in college football now, so you are looking at trying to work those guys at will and Mike because Rover is only going to be against certain teams.
And I can't remember if this was TP's question to Al Washington or who it was, but Al Washington discussed a little bit wider stance for Notre Dame's defensive ends, and Brice Young and Logan Thomas discussing that. They said it's something that Chris Ash has brought to the defense, and Al Washington specifically cited Chris Ash talked about Max Crosby and his versatility and having that little bit of wider stance. And so I thought that was an interesting nugget today from Al Washington, who, by the way, has lost 55 pounds himself since the beginning of last July.
He got one rep in him.
Completely, yeah. Well, it looks like it'd be a darn good rep. He looks fantastic. I thought that was interesting. Emil Wagner telling Pete Sampson and me that as he goes through this really staggered spring camp where he's not getting a lot of physical work, and I'm going to not divulge his snap count. I want Priester to get to spill the beans on that because it's such a prodigious number. But he says on Fridays he's picking up an extra lift every week so that he continues to maintain strength and add strength. And he did share with us that last Friday, joining him in that extra lift, Billy Schrouth.
Joe Rudolph said that Emil Wagner took 990 snaps last year, which, you know, when you consider a 16-game season,
he was the only guy to make it to 16 with
it
Riley
makes
Leonard.
sense, but that's a number that we've never heard in our sports writing careers. Yeah, I did ask Al Washington about the wider alignment for the boundary defensive ends, and Batella had talked about that and said, it gives them a little bit more freedom as opposed to a 6 technique. It's more of a 7. You get a little bit more of a running start. Brice Young confirmed that as well. And so Al Washington's great to talk to. He talked about how, every time he's around a new coach, he's a sponge. He wants to learn everything that coach has to offer. And Chris Ash has a few different ideas, still no doubt building upon what Al Golden implemented. But Chris Ash is an accomplished defensive coordinator as well.
Yeah, and I would just piggyback on that. Al Washington, every time you're around him, I think his passion is tangible. And you see him, and he talks about being a sponge. I think he means it. He's a guy that was very nearly Tennessee's defensive coordinator 3 years ago. Marcus Freeman convinced him to come here, or 4 years ago, Marcus Freeman convinced him to come here to Notre Dame instead. I do think he's a future defensive coordinator. I found it really resonant that he talked about how much Jason Onye's personal journey has personally changed him. We'll certainly be writing more on that on Irish Illustrated in the coming days.
Because spring ball is very much about, especially to our subscribers, about the reserves, I will continue to point out Cree Thomas backed up Leonard Moore on the boundary, freshman Cree Thomas. By the way, not easy to get used to Leonard Moore in number 2, but once again I was like, who is that guy? And it turns out it was Leonard Moore wearing a new number, so they did not get a new All-American corner. And then it was Carson Hobbs to the field behind Christian Gray, which put because Ben Minnick is working some at nickel. He did this last year too. He was working as the backup nickel with Devontae Smith, so much so the two of them worked together with absolutely nobody else for one entire segment today. And then on the backside, you had Kennedy Urlacher and Tay Johnson. I bring this up because Tay Johnson had to move to corner last year because they had no corners. Tay Johnson was back at safety. I think that's something people were kind of curious about.
Cree Thomas's name keeps being brought up to us, and I think a real testament to what he has shown up to this point is that the other day when we talked to Will Pauling, he mentioned Elijah Burris, who a fellow wide receiver, and then he mentioned Cree Thomas. So that tells you right there that the wide receiver core has noticed this early entry freshman has a lot of ability at cornerback, and no surprise he comes from Brophy, which produced, of course, Benjamin Morrison.
I spent some time talking to Jordan Botello today, and he did kind of confirm. I spoke with him at the Georgia game. He kind of confirmed he believes, and this was Rob Hunt telling him this, not just his personal belief, that he will have no restrictions for summer practices, which is great because that should mean he could be full go for the start of August camp. I would never, and this hasn't happened yet, but I would never have guessed that day on the field when they came to cart him off in West Lafayette.
Not only the day that he had to be carted off, I think it was September 14th in West Lafayette, Indiana, but also the fact that he had a really rough go of it in the initial stages after the surgery, and as he began the onset of physical rehabilitation, he really had a rough go of it, but a testament to how much he's buckled down and the player he was showing to be at the beginning of last season and the player that he's continuing to develop himself into.
I do want to add, Tim, when Al Washington was talking about Jared Dawson, 4 words that he said: motor, He has an edge to him. He's explosive and he's powerful. That's a good football player in the middle of Notre Dame's defensive line from Louisville.
One final note on the defensive line. He was asked about Sean Sevillano last, and that is a very popular person on our message board. Washington, before joking about he can't really be 342 pounds, did say he was the scout team defensive player of the year last year, and that came from Joe Rudolph, who goes against him, and Marcus Freeman, who watches scout team intently at all times. I think that's notable. I think it was a joke. He better still not be 342. Washington is smiling. Of course, a guy that just lost 55 pounds can make that type of joke, too.
He can absolutely, and he has the relationship with his players to make that joke. But it was key to note after he laughed about him, 342, he better not be. Yeah. He said he's got unbelievably good feet for a person his size and said that he's really difficult to move inside there. And so a couple of more nuggets there from Al Washington, definitely worth passing along, TP.
Sevillano's a player. I'm convinced of that. And we'll see more of that in 2026 than we do in 2025 because there are bodies there on the interior.
We will have a podcast tomorrow. There's also Notre Dame's NFL Pro Day is tomorrow as well. I'm actually going to wrap that up with another podcast Friday with Drew Mentok, and he was down at the NFL Combine, and I think he can add some good tidbits for that. And we will be back in. We won't see a practice, I don't think, until you guys have the April 5th Jersey scrimmage. Now, there's plenty of interviews in between now and then. But that practice will show a little bit more, I think, than the four-segment dynamic stretching did today.
That's a big practice. That's I think the media have attended the first 2 Wednesdays we've been allowed to view strictly to have the possibility of seeing that Jersey scrimmage.
I do want to add, Tim, that we are going to Irish Illustrated is going to be adding some more instant analysis offerings here.
Friday and Saturday this week.
Right. We normally only do it after we have a open viewing, but we as you mentioned, we got a whole bunch of interviews. So Irish Illustrated followers, be on the lookout for some more instant analysis.
For Tim Priester of Irish Illustrated and John Brice of Football Scoop, I'm Tim O'Malley. Thanks for watching Irish Illustrated Instant Analysis.